World War III update. I'm out here in the nice, beautiful sunshine. I got my skateboard. Check it out. And I'm going to be making this video. I'm going to be going to town for the next almost week, doing my driver's license test and all that stuff. Written test, the motorcycle written test. So this video will probably come out a little bit after, a couple of days after. So if the news is old by the time you get it, that's why. Next to that, I'm going to do a skateboard while bearding. That's how you skateboard while you're bearding. And just going to do a little. And we'll get into it now. Ooh. That's how you dims the brakes, eh? Yeah. That's where I wanted to park. Alright, so I did a World War III update yesterday from the making of this video. And I'll probably release them again one day and then the next day. But this I thought was a nice add-on to put. I got people over at the park there. That's nice. This one should get my tanker crew audience kind of interested. Basically, there's a NATO general who war games. Well, he's for the U.S. I got this off the Next News Network. I know I'm bad for not naming my sources and stuff like that, but it was on the Next News Network, and he's got the article down there. Gary French, I think, is pretty good. And basically, they war game the idea, after watching what's going on in the Ukraine, that the Russian tactics with the tanks seem to be superior. Now, you have to understand, okay, in the eastern Ukraine, what kind of tanks we got there? We're talking T-72, possibly T-80s, the odd one. A lot of BMP-1s, BMP-2s. I don't think there's too many BMP-3s there. BTR-80, BTR-60, BTR whatever, right? So all those old, a generation or two back on the Soviet stuff, right? I know it's Russian stuff. It's Federation, not Soviet. But it's Soviet era. It's Soviet era. It's still old enough to be called Soviet era. So those tactics are, with those older tanks and stuff like that, are working good. And the thing is that they're working almost too good. I'm not saying that they're not taking any losses. What they're saying is that NATO, the general's points were, NATO would be in for a rude awakening with the Russian tank superiority. They'd mop the floor with the U.S. or NATO. Basically, so and because this guy's the U.S. one, so he's taking it from the bias of how good his tanks are. Now, mind you, some of these generals do this from time to time to get extra funding to upgrade, right? I know the Abrams is always on a kind of a constant cycle of upgrading the tanks. I think there was like 5,000 or 8,000 built in total. Sometimes the numbers bounce around, whatever, but they get refurbished from time to time and modernized. And I think the last time was in the 90s or whatever. And I think it's still an ongoing program. So a few tanks a month. Ooh, I don't know where that wind came from, but hopefully you could have heard that. So a few tanks a month get modernized. Problem is the modernization program on these tanks that were designed in, I think, like 1972, 1975, whenever the Abrams was actually made. You're putting lipstick on a pig a bit when it comes to something like an Abrams, because it is still a good tank. Don't get me wrong. I mean, these suckers, ungoverned with their jet-powered engines, can do about 70 miles an hour. So mobility is definitely pretty good. But they're a big tank. They're very heavy, and you're talking about 150,000 pounds of metal, just with a big 120 millimeter main gun. But that said, they're nowhere near probably as mobile as the average Russian tank, T-72 on, because the Russian tanks are a lot lighter. Now, they give up armor. One thing you have to keep in mind with the Russian tanks is they're only a crew of 3 instead of 5. And they have an autoloader. How well the autoloader works? Well, they have been known to stuff the odd tank gunner into the main gun from time to time. The Russian tank crews usually wear tourniquets on their jackets in case they lose an arm or something, and they're kind of a tight squeeze. But they're only about 7 feet tall. They're fast as hell. They're a flying tank because by eliminating crew members, you can eliminate about 12,000 pounds of protective armor per crewmate. They estimated it takes about 12,000 pounds of armor to protect the crew member. So obviously you're talking 24,000 pounds lighter, which is a big difference for the difference in horsepower. 1,000 horsepower diesel engine versus 1,500 horsepower on the Abrams, but the difference is that, which is jet powered, but the difference is that, you don't have all that weight So what does that give you? A flying tank. And if you watch Russian tank biathlons, they're pretty interesting to watch. The tanks pretty much fly through the air. They can do it without braking. That's the thing. Like, they can jump over things without braking. So I think the Russian philosophy of tanks have never really changed: fast, mobile, and light. And now one T-72 on itself, with the modernization that they're doing with those, they're putting the modernized briquettes on it, which have now been very easily proven to be able to defeat US-made anti-tank tow missiles. Maybe not 2 hits, but they'll definitely survive the first hit. Heck, a Syrian T-63 was hit by one of these anti-tank missiles a few months ago, and it survived. And it's it's kind of a low-tech technology. It's reactive armor, but they're just little briquettes. What makes it good is that they're quick to change, so this allows the tank to get back into battle a lot quicker, should the crew survive. Or it allows the follow-up shot, you know, like the first guy gets to jump on you, but you get the follow, you know, the one return shot. Sometimes that's also going to take, especially if you have a 120 millimeter main gun, right? 125, so it's a pretty big round. So that said, this, you know, this year, last year, we've seen a lot of interesting things happen with some modernized tanks. And one thing about the modern tanks, they've never really been put to the test to see which tank is going to work and what's not. We do know the Challenger tank, that the British have, the Challenger 2, in Iraq took a pelting of about 90 anti-tank weapons, shoulder-fired weapons, for a couple of hours on end, with the track blown off of it, and the tank was basically scratch paint blown off the monocles. They repaired the track and repainted it, and had it back in service 2 days later. The crew was completely fine inside, listening to the thing smacking on the hull of the tank. But they didn't get hit by a real true anti-tank weapon, meaning we don't know if the Challenger would survive an RPG-29, RPG-31, RPG-30, whatever, or a tow missile. We don't know for sure if they would survive that. We know the T-90 for sure will survive it, because there was a T-90 hit, I think, twice with these modernizations. Plus, the Russians are modernizing once more with their T-14s coming online, which there's still some bugs in those things. I mean, you never buy the first year model of anything, right? Because, holy geez. Video. I think I want to stay in the sunshine where it's nice and warm. But anyway, so I thought there was a Leopard tank that got hit by a tow missile, a Turkish Leopard tank that got hit by a tow missile a few weeks back from the making of this video. Turns out it was an M60 Patton, RIP M60 Patton. It didn't make it. I never knew what the aftermath, but according to one of my audience members, subscribers, they said no, it didn't make it. So we know even a modernized M60 Patton, which preceded the Abrams tank, not going to be good on a battlefield in a World War III scenario. So I'm going to get back to this the American general in a second, or war planner, I guess you would say, is what he is. Maybe not a general, but a war planner. And yeah, so we know that right now the US-made tow missiles were taking out Abrams tanks as well. That Saudi Arabia has now. The Saudis probably have a slightly older variant of Abrams, but the upgrades to the Abrams, from what I remember, and if I'm wrong, I'm sure somebody will quote me on this, I still think it's a fantastic tank in numbers, but there's a lot of problems with it. Number one, the reason why I think the Soviets didn't stick with the T-80 is because the jet-powered gave it, a T-80 is basically a hot-rodded T-72, a jet-powered T-72. But the problem is they're guzzlers. Even though the T-80 was good on maintenance, it was higher on maintenance. The Abrams is a nightmare on maintenance. Even a Leopard tank, for every 1 hour run with an old, Leopard 1 or Leopard 2, you're looking at, for every 1 hour run, about 11 hours of routine maintenance. I mean, I remember talking to a Canadian tank crew, and they said, "Oh yeah, a Leopard day is a fun day, but it's a work day." Says the good things about those is that if something breaks, it's just a matter of how loud the guys grunt to fix it, like that type of thing. So the crew can maintain 90% of the tank in the field. Whereas something like a LAV, if you blow an axle or something, you got to call an engineer to come and fix it because it's complicated. Not that I'm saying the guys are stupid or anything like that, but okay, there's big track, big round wheel, put in big round bogey wheel, put track back on. Grunt, 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 and stuff like that. So it's a lot of work for these guys, and replacing the little rubber bits in the track and whatever. The track maintenance is a nightmare. that type of thing, especially if you're really pushing the tank to extreme limits and so Dukes of Hazzarding the thing over other tanks, that type of thing. The Russian tanks, they seem to have a lot of relief valves and stuff to allow, so when the barrel comes slamming down, you don't blow every hydraulic hose or electric motor. Some tanks use hydraulics, sometimes some use electrics. I think the Leopard is almost all electric and pneumatic, which means less likelihood of burning to death, potentially. Well, less combustibles anyway, so it doesn't mean you're going to survive, but it means less combustibles. So that's an upgrade that the Germans have done with their Leopards, and their Leopards now are like, I mean, these things can run over IEDs and mines and all kinds of stuff. And pretty much survive. The Abrams, to a degree, yes, but there's still a lot of Achilles heels. The Abrams tend to be a little bit softer on the bottom, and of course, for anti-tank missiles, that big jet-powered glowing thermal at the back of the tank is, a very attractive target. That's one of the problems with jet-powered tanks, is they produce way too much heat. Other things such as like with the Challenger tank, and I know that I'll get back to the guy in a second, but it's just to put the perspective of what I mean by we don't really know exactly what the win, lose, or draw will be. We do know that, like for example, the Challenger tank. Early days in Afghanistan or whatever, Iraq or Afghanistan, where the tanks would make it like a couple of kilometers and then conk out because the filters, they couldn't handle the fine desert sand. So they had to kind of completely it was a simple solution. What they did was they got some big rubber skirts and put it around the bottom of the track to skirt it right down to the ground so the dust wouldn't kick straight up into the filters. And so I mean, things like that you don't know until you get into combat. So I mean, can you imagine that here comes a over the hilltop T-72s, T-80s, and T-90s, and you gun it and all of a sudden your tank stalls. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I mean, at that point, just fire the rounds as fast as you can. You're going to die there anyway, and all tanks burn. It doesn't matter. There is no such thing as an impervious tank, in my opinion. How do you defeat the reactive armor? Hit it twice in the same spot. You know what I mean? Like that type of thing. The 1-2 punch, like over there in India, they have anti-tank weapons that have triple warhead. So bang, bang, bang instead of bang, bang. So one's to defeat the armor. Second explosion is to go after it cuts through the hull, is to blow up inside the tank. Well, now you have one to defeat the armor, one to defeat the hull, one to eliminate the tank. So like anything, there's always usually high tech, low tech, high tech, low tech. Of an arms race, right? So that's something to keep in mind. The other thing to keep in mind is that, again, like I say, the Russians they don't use the T-80s as much because they realized that they were kind of problematic in the field, that they were high maintenance, they were guzzlers like crazy. I mean, the mileage is definitely not too good on those. More complicated, and the turbine engines are more, they might do okay in this kind of a place, but the amount of dust that's kicked up, even taking a tank through a grassy field, you're going to kick up so much dust, it would just be a maintenance nightmare after a few weeks. And most of the Russian tanks are designed to go about 2 weeks without maintenance. That said, the T-90 went back to a diesel engine, and that refined everything. It took basically all the advances of the T-80, jammed them into the T-90, and now the T-90 is almost completely turned into something else, but it's basically getting the main gun and the fire control system and the countermeasure systems of the T-14 until the T-14s come online. And those things are going to be coming online at a rate of 500 a year. So, these are a completely new tank. And the thing about the T-14 is it's a digitized tank. So I think the T-14, the T-90 is going to be the staple tank for a long time. But the thing is one thing that the Russians are finding out in Syria is and they're doing this with all their equipment. Like, I mean, the Syrian war has been the best thing to happen to the Russians. It's the best, like, it's really not breaking the Russian economy. They don't have so much there that is breaking the Russian economy. These guys would be training over their normal areas, or they could actually be putting their crews to the real test in a real live scenario. What works, what doesn't work. And they found a bunch of things that don't work well under combat stress. So now they have the ability to redevelop or refix or rethink their strategies or whatever, because they now know what works, what doesn't. And with that, I mean, put it to you this way: if Hitler had the extra, let's say, 4 years to develop the ME-262 and find out what it could and could not do, what would it have turned into? You know what I mean? That type of thing. Not that I'm like toting the, go Nazi, go. No, I'm saying the developments that they made, for example, with the ME-163 Salamander, also known as the People's Fighter, it would, they were going to pumped those out at a rate of 500 per month. But then the war ended. But the thing is that they went through the BMW 01s, 02s, 03s, and 04 engines before they weren't killing pilots. You know what I mean? Like with flameouts. So what happens to the 04, 05, 06, 07, 08, 09, 010 engines, right? So you find this out if you have a way to test it. And the best way to test it is in, unpredictable circumstances. This is why the AKs, right now the Russians are even reconsidering replacing the AK-47. They have variants that might, rifles that might beat it, but what they're finding is that it's not justifiable for the cost because the AK still does such a bang-up job. So, that said, they've modernized them a bit and stuff like that. And they're modernizing the entire Russian military and Navy. Right now, their largest aircraft carrier is going to get a retrofit. The Su-33s are going to be pulled off of that because the Su-33s could pretty much take off, because it's such a small aircraft carrier. There's like 14 Su-33s on this aircraft carrier, and when they take off, they can only really take off with an air-to-air payload. They can't really take the heavier ground ordnance. So what they've actually done is they kind of went a little bit less is more. So what they did is they're going to replace the Su-33s with MiG-29s, which are lighter and can take off in with a respectable ground attack payload. So that's what they're doing there. And then, of course, they're going to, kind of revamp. Again, the Russians don't reinvent the wheel. They just refine it. And that's what I think they're going to do there. But, okay, getting back to the main meat and potatoes of the topic. Now that we talked about tanks and the ones that would survive, wouldn't survive. The anti-tank weapon is the biggest fear of a tank crew. Even more so than fighter jets or attack aircraft or whatever. Most of the things that people would get killed by in a tank is going to be coming, direct ground, line of sight coming right at you. The RPG-7s and stuff like that, the shoulder herald stuff, at a distance, like at 400 or 500 yards. I mean, those things are supposed to be able to punch through 260 to 270 millimeters of, solid armor at a distance of about 600 meters. That's pretty impressive for old technology. So the new stuff now, everything's thermobaric, everything is, depleted uranium and all that stuff. Some of it doesn't need that. It's just the kinetic energy, the way they can direct the blast, the shape charge and all that. It really, really does change the game. So when you have your big heavy tank, the fact that it can get taken out so easily makes you have to rethink, well, how do you make sure that it doesn't? Well, again, the electronic warfare on a tank is something that is kind of new. We didn't have that in World War II. So that's a huge advantage. And the thing is it really doesn't take much to be able to add that stuff onto the older tanks. And one thing about the T-72, even though the Russians don't use as many of them as they used to use, the T-72 is still kind of the backbone of the tanks that they have in numbers. There were 17,000 of those things made. I don't know how many the Russians will leave them in the field to rust for 40 years and then, go with some hammers, smack all the bogies and then, play around with it for half an hour and then get the thing running up, run it off with some kerosene or just drag it back by rail to be refitted. So these things, they're rusty now, but a little bit of sandblasting, some new paint, rewiring, there you go, you got a functional tank again. But the tactics is where the biggest threat is. It's the guy lying in wait, over in the tree line over there where you can't see him, that ambushes, and whatever. That's the thing. Now, what they said was that the Bradley tank, which if you ever seen the movie Pentagon Wars, there's so much truth. I was like, how does an M113 get redesigned as a 10-foot vehicle with enough firepower to take out a small country? Like, how does it go from that to that, right? And the Pentagon Wars movie, although it's a spoof movie, I think there's so much truth to it, it's not funny. But the thing is that when it gets to the point of what works, what doesn't, well, a BMP, is not going to take out a Bradley very easily. I don't think it could even make a dent in a Bradley. But the anti-tank weapon sitting on top of it can. So this is where the modernizing of older equipment becomes very, very attractive for the Russians. Well, all they have to do, really, is just put stuff on it that blows, that takes the hit. So they don't really have to rebuild. But the thing is they have numbers. So, and even if they can't retrofit everything, the best tank crews are going to be in the T-90s and stuff like that, and those guys, those guys are going to be complete hell. I'm not saying that they're going to be undefeatable, but again, if we're talking in combination with air power, when you know, like 10,000 Soviet tanks come over the hilltop, that's, you know, they're coming at you at, you know, 30 miles an hour or whatever, 20 miles an hour. That doesn't give you a lot of time to respond to that. And the overwhelm with numbers is still a Russian tactic. It works. So that said, the lighter vehicles that can kind of be slightly more mobile just because they're lighter, even though they can't take a hit. We have, which I watched a very interesting movie or clips of another movie called White Tiger, basically based upon World War II between Russian tank crews and a single German Tiger tank that was kind of painted white. I don't know if there's any historical you know, base for this, but basically it's this German Tiger tank. It's a little cheesy looking in the effects. It's a lower budget, but it was an enjoyable enough movie that, like, you know, if you can read subtitles, you might enjoy it. But anyway, this thing is like knocking off tank after tank after tank. You know, and you know the big Tiger tanks. I mean, like in the movie Fury, when the big Tiger tank comes out of the bush there, it's like they were a terror weapon and a half because they were psychologically debilitating because of the size of the things at the time. These were like really large battle tanks. But what was really scary is that when you'd fire the 76 millimeter or 72 millimeter main gun at them, you know, World War II, from your Sherman tank, your Tommy burner, and watching, it would be very intimidating to see the they go, you know, ricochet. You fired 5 shots and it's just bouncing off the hull. Because at the time, thick armor was all you needed. Thicker was better. They had their problems, mobility, range. I mean, most of these tanks didn't go more than a couple of kilometers. Really, they didn't go that far because they burnt up so much fuel. But the thing is that big 88 millimeter gun was a one-hit wonder. It basically, it took about 4 Tommy tanks, Tommy burners, Sherman tanks to take out one Tiger. But however, when you have 10,000 plus Shermans to 1,300 Tigers, it balances out. Well, the T-34s were the same thing. They were light, they were fast. The Germans took one look at them and they said, these things, like, I mean, they were so crude. I mean, they just had like a little, you know, they didn't even have proper levers in it. It was just, you know, like a one lever, you know, it was the most simple, basic tank. But they were so effective because they could come at you so fast. And that was enough. A lot of times that was enough. They really couldn't take much of a hit, but they were, if you got a good hit on them. But the thing is with the sloped armor, that was how they were able to keep the tank light, and that was also how they were able to keep it, you know, lighter is faster, and it was also less maintenance when it wasn't breaking down all the time. And they also eliminated the upper bogies on the tank, which made the tank again lighter and simpler and whatever. And you threw a track less. So that's where the T-34 actually became, because of its simplicity, actually became one of the best tanks of World War II. You know, again, you could get killed in it. There was, you know, they weren't perfect. But working in battalion force, they were pretty freaking effective, you know what I mean? Yeah. So we have kind of the same thing going on again, where, yes, we got Russian tanks that are lighter, way more modernized. They have digital, you know, all the countermeasures a tank would have, plus digital stuff to basically confuse high-tech missiles coming in. They got active armor, reactive armor, and the difference between on the Russian tanks is they're the only ones that have active armor, meaning the reactive armor, projectile hits it and it blows off. But with the reactive, that's the reactive armor. But with the active armor, projectile comes in and there's a sensor. I don't know how well it works. Everything always, you know, they say it works. Always say it works better than advertised, but usually there's always faults to these things. You know, mud on the monocle or whatever. But anyway, the case in point is that the weapon coming in, okay, is basically detected, and if it's like an anti-tank weapon, just before the weapon hits the tank, the briquette blows off, and the thing will hit sideways or blow it up altogether. So in other words, it's like shooting back. It's like skeet shooting from briquettes. It's kind of an interesting concept, but it seems to work. The second is, okay, well, it detects that it's like, say, 50 caliber. Well, the plate, it won't hit the plates hard enough to blow them off. Maybe it's the M84 or whatever. 84, the shoulder held. Basically, it's like the modern bazooka. And that thing, yeah, okay, if that hits the tank in a certain area, it's going to definitely blow a track off. Could possibly completely destroy the tank. It's meant for medium and light armor, but you never know. You change the ammunition, all of a sudden you can kill anything, right? So something like that, it might just blow off on impact. Other stuff might blow off active-reactive. So they're the only tank that has that. But the thing is that gives you maybe not the advantage. For example, it might not give you the advantage of the first shot, but it might give you the advantage of the second shot. So, and this is what we're seeing in Syria with the T-90s, is that they get hit, and then all of a sudden now we know where the tow missile crew is, and even if the guy's just, because usually with those you're going to get one shot anyway, and if that shot don't count, whatever, because you're going to see the contrail from where it came from, or roughly which direction, and then from then get on the monocles, use the thermals, whatever, and you'll find these guys and then fire a shot, right? So they're probably not going to have enough time to fire a second shot. So even if the tank survives and it's damaged, you take out that tow missile system, they don't have that anymore. Even though those things can be built a lot quicker. But there's also the robot factor that's coming into this now. The Russians, again, their full modernization is basically going to have a robot army as well to go up ahead. We see this with autonomous vehicles. Americans have been working on it forever. Here in Canada, we've been setting up labs to be autonomous as a part of the program. And basically, they go up ahead, and they got this thing now. It basically looks like a small tank with just a 25 millimeter main gun or a 30 millimeter main gun. And it goes up ahead of the tanks. Now, if you're a tank crew and you see that, okay, that's kind of it's like having a tracked drone. That's the best way to put it. So the Russians have the same idea. So, okay, you see this drone, okay, as long as it doesn't spot you, you just still wait in ambush. But if you have to take it out, you take it out, whatever. But those things are usually not armed heavy enough to take out a tank. So even if you're spotted at that point, again, you wouldn't have the advantage. So what he's saying is that with the tactics that they're using, even they'd be slaughtered. I don't know if they would be slaughtered because we don't know exactly what happens when a 125 millimeter anti-tank round, penetrate, armor piercing round hits an Abrams. So we don't know. So that hasn't happened yet. We do know what happens when the anti-tank weapons hit. I think some of the anti-tank weapons are actually more powerful than some of the ammunition fired out of the main gun. So with that, again, maybe the Abrams would be able to survive long enough to go toe-to-toe with the T-90, no problem. However, there's a problem with the T-90s too. I mean, they're not perfect. That said, that follow-up shot, is it enough to, are they going to get, who's going to get the second shot, who's going to get the first shot, whatever. Again, we don't know because, again, the T-90s haven't been hit by main guns in Syria yet to know exactly if it's as good as advertised or not. But we do know they can defeat the anti-tank weapons. And the tow missile right now is pretty much the best the U.S. has. They give them to ISIS, and the ISIS guys and the Houthi guys, they're getting them too. The Kurdish guys are getting them. It was Kurds that, I believe, fired at the Turkish tank. And, so it's like, okay, so we know what happens with those tanks. Now, the Leopard tanks, when they come out, I don't know how they're going to do either. But the Leopards, there's a lot of advantages to I think it's still the best tank ever designed. But can it take a hit? That's the whole thing. But the tactics is where the problem is you have numbers and you have tactics on the sides of the Russians in that area of the world. So NATO can't, they've already admitted that they can't take the Russian air power in the area. And so all the build-up, like they would be overrun in like 5 minutes. So if you have attack helicopters flying around, basically Ka-50s flying around, and Ka-52s flying around, which are now in Syria being tested as well. So the Russians are going to find out what works, what doesn't, in real combat, type of thing. Now, the Hinds and stuff like that, I don't think the Hinds really do that well. They tend to get shot down a lot easier than what they used to. They don't get shot down as easy as they used to, but they still get shot down. But I think the thing is, with the air power in combination with movement of tanks on the ground, it gives NATO more than a run for its money, and you have more of them on the Russian side. So they're lighter, they're smaller, and they're more mobile. Whether they can take a better hit or not is not really going to be the issue. It's going to be the issue of who's going to get the first shot. And that's where I think the advantage is going to go to the Russians, because they just, okay, sure, you take out one tank, but then 5 other ones shoot at, it's like a 3 or 4 to 1 ratio. You're just not going to be able to reload fast enough to be able to deal with that. And the other problem is that, factor in attack helicopters. Yes, the Apache, I think, is the best attack helicopter in the world. But the Russian ones are pretty darn good too. They're good. They're fast. They're superior in climb, especially the Ka-50 with the coaxial rotors. They tend to be a bit better in the high mountainous areas. They tend to be better for climb rate. They're not by much. I mean, we're talking like almost like World War I kind of climb rate, like 1,800 feet a minute or something like that. For a helicopter, that's still pretty damn fast. you know, the Apache might be, it's in that range. Speed-wise, the Russian helicopters, most of them can do at least 200 miles an hour. I don't know if that's with full payload, but they are clocked pretty fast. Maneuverability, actually, the Russian helicopters tend to be more maneuverable. But the thing is, if the other thing is you have to factor in is that the Russians have now digitized their tank crews. So even the older tanks, they know where the bad guys are to them. And same thing like the Leopard crews here in Canada. They have, you know, again, they can save a lot of ammo by using satellite to figure out, okay, well, we go around that corner, there's 20 T-72s sitting there, or T-80s or T-90s. Okay, well, we can create the ambush by going around because we know they're there before they can see us. That's, you know, why we have the Coyote and stuff like that, is to be able to see over the horizon a bit, plus use satellite, you know, data to do that. So the Russians are doing the same. So I don't think anybody really has a huge upper hand here. I think it would be a slaughter for everybody, but when you have a Russian or an American general saying, no, we'd be in for a rude awakening if we went into Eastern Europe, which, I mean, right now, especially in the, not Georgia, but, what you call it, anyway, the buildup of bringing in missile systems and all that stuff. Like the missile systems, I don't think would last long anyway, because, again, if the tanks run in, they're going to be taking that stuff out on the ground, so, you know, plus with the air power, so it'll be moving together. It would be and the Russians, they are willing to sacrifice men a lot easier, it seems, where, you know, it's like the communist ideology of simply overwhelm them with numbers has never changed. They know this works. You might lose a lot of men, but you might win the war, you know what I mean? That was the whole concept behind the AK-47. Jump out of the vehicle, spray your 600 rounds a minute, you're going to expend a lot of ammo, but you might win the fight. You know, rather than taking careful shot. That's where the spray and pray thing kind of comes from. And it's a tactic that works. Every military in the world uses it now. It's like as soon as you hear a shot, just fire in the direction you heard the shot. You might hit something. And then let the other, you know, have one guy that's designated to find stuff, the other guy spraying and praying with the, you know, the saw gun. Just spray the tree line until, okay, and then the other guy, okay, he's there, and then, you know, then you can hone in on it. That's how it kind of works. So it's, you know, you waste a lot of ammo, but, you know, you put down cover fire, you do this, you do that. Well, it's the same with the tanks, you know. It's the same with the tanks. So, again, we now have two emissions of generals and war planners saying that, no, they can't take Russia air power-wise in Eastern Europe, and they can't take them. They'd be in for a rude awakening. And he used the words, the U.S. would be in a rude, you know, up for a rude awakening if they tried to go into Eastern Europe against the tank brigades of Russia. I'm not saying the Russians are impervious. I think they would lose astronomical. The thing is, I don't, like in a World War III scenario, this is where I say they're, you know, like where people have to use a little bit of, you know, get out of the hardcore, force something hardcore game. Get out of that absolutism. You have to look in the gray area. I think the death toll, what the Russians would be ready for, and the Russians and the Chinese, within the past week again, have stated, particularly the Chinese, saying that if you push it, we don't want war, but if you want war, we're ready for it. And basically saying that they will defend their borders. You know, every country's like this. And the thing is that they can. I don't know if the Russians would win a war, you know, a conventional war. I think if it went, because you have to understand, the first thing that happens before they even roll tanks is they start shooting down satellites. Now, the thing is the way the Russians are digitizing, they're not relying on satellites. So, yeah, that does limit you to a degree, yes. But satellites will go down, and then you're in an analog war. And then if you are in an analog war and you don't know, you know, where, you know that the Russians are coming, but you don't know where they're coming from, it'll just be a slaughter fest. I think both sides will lose so much. And I think what their mentality is this. If we start sending body bags back, even if we take losses 10-1, if we send body bags back to the U.S. thousands at a time, like in World War I, World War II, nobody has the stomach for that kind of fight. Nobody in the Western world has the stomach for that kind of a fight. The Russians, they may not have the stomach for that fight either, but their people have a little bit less say and control over their government than we do, let alone how much control they have, right? So we do know that they are willing to make that sacrifice, and they're prepping their guys for that. Here in the States, a lot of, down there in the States and here in Canada, a lot of soldiers get lost on the way to college. Big difference. You know, I'm not putting the soldiers down. The soldiers, that are good are really good. Problem is they're few and far between. You know what I mean? That type of thing. So not everybody's meant to be a professional soldier. And most people, and this is why recruitment is so low now, pretty much in all Western countries, particularly the United States, is that war is so rampant that nobody wants to go to war. They want a career. They want to join the military. They want to be patriotic, but they're not stupid. You know, self-preservation says, if I join up now, I'm going to be ending up going to war. And I think the people that do sign up now think that they're going to get into war and they're going to enjoy it. I don't think so. I don't think so. I think burning to death in a tank is a horrible way to go. And I haven't heard from him in a long time, but Marco, one of my subscribers who was describing the tank wars back in Serbia and Croatia way back in the 90s, and he was telling me about his encounter with the Leopard tank. I made a video on it way back when. It was a great story. It was, interesting to see, and I mean, even him himself, he was talking about the times he got injured in the tank. And one thing he said about the T-72s, he says, they're meant for open field and sneaking around, running around. They weren't meant for close quarters. And if you think about how the Russians are going to use these tanks, that's what they're going to use them for. They're going to do that. So what do they have for close quarters now? Well, they got the TOS missile system, the flamethrower, the T-72 with 32 or 24 thermobaric rockets on it. So you have the rocket forces. This is something that a lot of people are not considering. Tank warfare, it hasn't really changed a lot since World War II, but there are the things that they learned in World War II. Look, the Katyusha rockets, they still use these little trucks with rockets on them. Very low tech. They got 10,000 of these things. They only have to take out a few. One of those things takes out a Bradley or whatever, or even just the poor bastards that are not inside the tank to be protected. You're going to take out the fuel truck. I mean, if you're a BMP-2 crowd and you see an Abrams, what's the first thing you shoot? The fuel truck behind it. Yeah, why? Because that Abrams isn't going to if he's more than 60 miles from his base, he ain't going to be making it back. You know what I mean? That's what you're going to do. So, heck, if you're a sniper, you're going to shoot the fuel trucks. You know what I mean? Like, that's the problem with the older tanks, is they, particularly things like Abrams, Challenger, Leopard. I'm not too sure. I think Leopard can run on multi-fuels. Most of the tanks can, but the Russians can run on like 8 types of fuels. Almost to the point where you're saying, okay, that's not fuel, that's crude oil. You know what I mean? They do have it that low. They run a lot of stuff on kerosene. Why? It's easier to produce, right? So there's these things that they will have long-term advantages on with the lower grade tanks. And the other thing is the maintenance. But the other thing is just the numbers. So again, I'm not U.S. bashing here or NATO bashing. I'm saying when the people that would be the war planners are saying it's, you're in for a rude awakening if you think you can take these guys. Their tactics are going to be maybe not necessarily superior, or unbeatable, but they're going to be effective enough that we won't have the upper hand. Again, Vietnam. One thing about the Vietnam War is the amount of veteran protesters that came back. In this day and age, I mean, one reason why Afghanistan and Syria, like, look at Syria. Okay, when Obama wanted to go boots on the ground in Syria, what happened? The people said no. Remember they were using the warships to fire missiles into Syria, stuff like that, and then, okay, tomorrow we're going to have boots on the ground type of thing? The people said no. The people said no. Why? Because they're sick of war. They enough wars for Israel and the bankers, you know what I mean? And that's what these are. And the Russians, well, again, I'm not saying they're the good guys. I mean, they got their problems, but they've got like 4 or 5, maybe 10 bases outside Russia. The United States has like 700. So who's really, who's at war with everybody? It's the United States. Even Donald Trump has said that. He goes, "We're at war with everybody." We don't play well with anybody. And why? Well, it's the bankers' war. It's that death and debt-based economy. Anyway, my battery's going to die, so I'm going to have to wrap this one up. But I thought this was kind of a tank exclusive. I know some people prefer to hear more of the news than tactics and stuff like that. I get that, but I do think it's important to put into perspective that for those out there, and I get these comments from time to time. It's like, oh, their military's nothing. We'll walk through them in 5 minutes. Remember, World War I was only supposed to be 2 weeks. World War II was only supposed to last 6 months tops. Look at the disaster that happened. Syria, which really doesn't have, even with the extra Russian equipment coming into the Syrian regime, with the free, the Syrian Arab Army, which is the best fighting force in Syria right now. Even with all the stuff they're getting, look at that. That's nothing compared to World War II. But we haven't seen a World War II kind of conflict in a long time. Well, we've never seen that before. That was very destructive. In a 4-year span, could you imagine what it would be, a 4-year span of modern day equipment? again, think of the upgrades of the equipment. I think nobody really has that much of an upper hand, Russians or whatever. The thing is, who's willing to take more with them, I think, is more the question. And when you think about it that way, then you realize, okay, there is no winners. Nobody wins that war. We all lose. And the thing is this is why the United States is pushing so hard to get women to die on the front line. I mean, they want everybody there. They're just going to round everybody. Either you go to jail or you go to take your draft, or you're not patriotic. Well, the thing is no. When somebody goes to send you to war, it's not a matter of being guilted into being patriotic. It's you need to question it. I would probably go to jail rather than fight a banker war for nothing, just so some people can get rich off of some oil and stuff like that. No, or the petrodollar. I'm not going to fight for the petrodollar. No, I'm not going to fight for that. That said, on the other hand, the first guy on the line when Chinese and Russian paratroopers come in Red Dawn style will be me. Like I'm there. You won't have to ask me. I'm going to leave a trail of fire behind me. I'm going to run so fast. Yeah, I'll be there duck hunting. You know what I mean? Taking out paratroopers, whatever. Why? Because I defend my nation. That's one thing. But to go and fight these wars, when you look into them, and a lot of people don't want to look into them because they don't want to acknowledge the truth of how corrupt these wars are. None of them need to happen. Even World War I and World War II could have been avoided, but the bankers didn't want that. They wanted it to happen. And the more you track this stuff, the more you realize it. Now, should you go tell World War II veterans that, they were, their war was a lie? No, don't be cruel. I mean, these people volunteered because they didn't have the access to the media and stuff we have today and the resources we have today to figure out how this stuff is a scam. And there was a lot of World War II vets that were already smart enough to figure this out, but so low numbers that a guy like me in World War II would have been shot for treason. World War I would have been shot for treason. Why? Because even if I would point out the obvious, that these were banker wars at the time, again, the masses are on that side. So this day and age, well, we have the upper hand of being able to, the people have the upper hand to stop the wars. If they can do it, the whole reason why ISIS is what it is right now is because the people said no. But the thing is that also shows people that no, these wars are really false when you're trying to say you're fighting them on one side and then arming these murderous terrorists on the other side. Again, how does a regime like Syria have a stockpile of US-made anti-tank tow weapons with German labels on them? And how does ISIS get so lucky to find these things when the Syrians never used American-made tow missiles? How do they keep finding these cache stockpiles of American-made weapons in Syria? And there's a lot of people put out there say, they took the weapons off of U.S. dead soldiers. No, no. They only killed a handful of U.S. soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan when you think about it. But we're talking 20, 30,000, 70,000 small arms, 150 artillery. Yeah, some stuff was left behind. Yes, like the Humvees and stuff like that. Sure, and a few Abrams tanks. Fine. And we know, like, a perfect example is like the ISIS guys. Like 5 minutes after the tank runs out of fuel, they can no longer get the tank up and running again. So the Abrams aren't much of a threat in the hands of ISIS. They don't have the engineer corps to keep them going. But the problem is that they got them. And they got them on purpose, not because of negligence, on purpose. They were, the equipment was dropped to them. The difference is, though, is they can't maintain this stuff. They're not a professional standing army. They're mercenaries, mostly for hire. But who hired them? Well, we know with the admission from two Assad generals. And you see pictures of these guys for the propaganda for ISIS. And they come out and say, no, we created these guys. We trained them up in Jordan with the U.S. And 4,000 there. And they believe there's about 5,000 of these ISIS guys left. The rest of them are probably all in Europe. Why? At some point, mercenaries are going to say, well, I'm going to get killed if the Russians are actually trying to kill us. That said, if the Russians wanted it ended tomorrow, they would do full-out Red Dawn-style invasion from one end of the country to the other, and they could end this in probably 2 weeks if they wanted. So I think what the Russians are using, they're using the Syria conflict. Again, it's not really costing them much more than what they would normally be paying to train anyway. Maybe a little bit more, but not by much. The billions and billions or trillions of dollars spent in Iraq and Afghanistan by the U.S. government to fight there, and then you have the Russians. I think they're all in like 480 million in Syria. Okay, that's a lot of money. Don't get me wrong, but that's like nothing for almost a year of fighting. So you know what I mean? It's a training exercise for them, and it allows them to know what their equipment can and cannot do. So yeah, there you go. Live fire training exercise. There you go. Next to that. I guess I'm babbling now. Go on but no, there's no good guys here. the world elites, all the politicians that are calling for going to war with Russia and China, your John McCain's and all that, and Obama trying to start wars all over the place. He's just a puppet. You have to understand, this is a Zebra Brzezinski, Henry Kissinger particularly, George Soros, David Rockefeller, Rothschilds. Pick a Rothschild. There's like 1,000 of them. Well, hopefully there's not that many of them. But you get an idea of who's doing what, and not only that, you get the idea very clearly that they're not doing this for the women and children and all that stuff. So we know who's doing what. If you follow this channel, yeah, it might sound like conspiracy, but it's trackable. Again, yeah, I'm bad at not putting my sources down there, but it's all trackable. If I can find this stuff, you can find this stuff. You know what I mean? But anyway, yeah, I do find it very interesting. Oh, and there's a British general that wrote a book saying that a possibility of war with Russia by 2017, and using all what's going on. So I mentioned him last time, but I wasn't sure who it was, but it was so that's out there. So you have a British general. You have all these people up here, generals and stuff like that, saying, no, yeah. But it's the ones that are saying, okay, well, this is a bad idea. Maybe we should listen to them. If they really truly think that, it would be a slaughter fest and you'd get your asses handed to yourselves if you invaded Eastern Europe and provoked Russia into fighting. Well, maybe, isn't that time to talk to Russia? You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying that the Russians are saints, but maybe that agreement that was made for NATO not to expand a thumb width further, maybe the U.S. shouldn't have went against that. Maybe NATO shouldn't have went against that. Now, Russia's not expanding. They say Russians are expanding everywhere. They're not expanding. They're not expanding. Their neighbors don't like them. I get that. Their neighbors are still, Poland is still Poland. It's not up, Ukraine. Okay, yeah, they took their interest there. Why? But they wouldn't have otherwise if there wasn't a U.S. coup in there. Which, of course, you have the Maidan with the neo-Nazi groups in there again, and some others there. Again, all the George Soros-funded stuff. You have the Azov Battalion in there, which is again they're a Nazi battalion. Like, I mean, that's what they are. They're based upon World War II, the 2nd Panzer Division of the SS Waffen. I mean, they're in the M305B. 305, whatever battalion they are in, anyway. But yeah, so I mean, you got Nazis running around in Kiev. Like, I mean, it's a complete rehash of World War II. Nazis fighting communists. I'm not saying they're all communists or all Nazis, but the people that are doing all the bad stuff, again, follow the money. It goes back to George Soros. George Soros is one of the guys that gets all this stuff going. So, do we send our young people to fight, or do we put these people in jail because they're going to get us all killed? They're idiots. So again, I'm just going to leave it at that. So if you like this kind of content, please consider making a donation channel. Links down below. Thank you so much to everybody who has. Next to that, rate, subscribe, share, comment, like. Oh, and if you want to make a couple of bucks for yourself, you can check out my TSU link. It's also down below. It doesn't cost you anything to sign up, and it's a lot of fun. It works a lot like Facebook, and it's free. And I'm almost at 13 bucks. Oh yeah, and that type of thing. So go sign up there. Next to that, if you want to check out my WW3 updates Facebook page, you can post pictures and memes, or you can post articles on there that you think are related to the geopolitical and the economy, because it's all tied in together, right? It's all the same system. And you could do that, or you can also go on my Twitter, which I only post this video on Twitter just to get in front of an extra audience. Not Reg Me, or not Reg Me too, I can't remember, but you can post there as well. Share it around. Next to that, rate, subscribe, share, comment, like. Be true to yourselves, be true to others. Always do the right thing, and have yourselves a great day, eh? G'day, and welcome. All right, World War III update. I'm out here in the nice, beautiful sunshine. I got my skateboard. Check it out. And I'm going to be making this video. I'm going to be going to town for the next almost week, doing my driver's license test and all that stuff, written test, the motorcycle written test. So this video will probably come out a little bit after, a couple of days after. So if the news is old by the time you get it, that's why. Next to that, I'm going to do a skateboard while bearding. That's how you skateboard while you're bearding. And just going to do a little, and we'll get into it now. Ooh. I thought you dimmed the brakes, eh? Yeah. That's where I wanted to park it. Alright, so I did a World War III update yesterday from the making of this video. And I'll probably release them again one day and then the next day. But this I thought was a nice add-on to put. I got people over at the park there. That's nice. This one should get my tanker crew audience kind of interested. Basically, there's a NATO general who war games. Well, he's for the U.S. I got this off the Next News Network. I know I'm bad for not naming my sources and stuff like that, but it was on the Next News Network, and he's got the article down there. Gary Franchi, I think, is pretty good. And basically, they war game the idea, after watching what's going on in the Ukraine, that the Russian tactics with the tanks seem to be superior. Now, you have to understand, okay, in the eastern Ukraine, what kind of tanks we got there? We're talking T-72, possibly T-80s, the odd one. A lot of BMP-1s, BMP-2s. I don't think there's too many BMP-3s there. BTR-80, BTR-60, BTR whatever, right? So all those old, a generation or two back on the Soviet stuff, right? I know it's Russian stuff. It's Federation, not Soviet. But it's Soviet era. It's Soviet era. It's still old enough to be called Soviet era. So those tactics are, with those older tanks and stuff like that, are working good. And the thing is that they're working almost too good. I'm not saying that they're not taking any losses. What they're saying is that NATO, Russia, the general's points were NATO would be in for a rude awakening with the Russian tank superiority. They'd mop the floor with the U.S. or NATO. Basically, so and because this guy's the U.S. one, so he's taking it from the bias of how good his tanks are. Now, mind you, some of these generals do this from time to time to get extra funding to upgrade, right? I know the Abrams is always on a kind of a constant cycle of upgrading the tanks. I think there was like 5,000 or 8,000 built in total. Sometimes the numbers bounce around, whatever, but they get refurbished from time to time and modernized. And I think the last time was in the 90s or whatever. And I think it's still an ongoing program. So a few tanks a month. Ooh, I don't know where that wind came from, but hopefully you could have heard that. So a few tanks a month get modernized. Problem is the modernization program on these tanks that were designed in, I think, like 1972, 1975, whenever the Abrams was actually made. You're putting lipstick on a pig a bit when it comes to something like an Abrams, because it is still a good tank. Don't get me wrong. I mean, these suckers, ungoverned with their jet-powered engines, can do about 70 miles an hour. So mobility is definitely pretty good. But they're a big tank. They're very heavy, and you're talking about 150,000 pounds of metal, just with a big 120 millimeter main gun. With that said, they're nowhere near probably as mobile as the average Russian tank, T-72 because the Russian tanks are a lot lighter. Now, they give up armor. One thing you have to keep in mind with the Russian tanks is they're only a crew of 3 instead of 5. And they have an autoloader. How well the autoloader works? Well, they have been known to stuff the odd tank gunner into the into the main gun from time to time. The Russian tank crews usually wear tourniquets on their jackets in case they lose an arm or something, and they're kind of a tight squeeze. But they're only about 7 feet tall. They're fast as hell. They're a flying tank because by eliminating crew members, you can eliminate about 12,000 pounds of protective armor per crew. They estimated it takes about 12,000 pounds of armor to protect a crew member. So obviously you're talking 24,000 pounds lighter, which is a big difference for the difference in horsepower. 1,000 horsepower diesel engine versus 1,500 horsepower on the Abrams, but the difference is that which is jet powered. But the difference is that you don't have all that weight. So what does that give you? A flying tank. And if you watch Russian tank biathlons, they're pretty interesting to watch. The tanks pretty much fly through the air. They can do it without braking. That's the thing. Like, they can jump over things without braking. So I think the Russian philosophy of tanks have never really changed. Fast, mobile, and light. Now, one T-72 on itself, with the modernization that they're doing with those, they're putting the modernized briquettes on it, which have now been very easily proven to be able to defeat U.S.-made anti-tank tow missiles. Maybe not 2 hits, but they'll definitely survive the first hit. Heck, a Syrian T-63 was hit by one of these anti-tank missiles a few months ago, and it survived. And it's this it's kind of a low-tech technology. It's reactive armor, but they're just little briquettes. What makes it good is that they're quick to change, so this allows the tank to get back into battle a lot quicker, should the crew survive. Or it allows the follow-up shot, you know, like the first guy gets the jump on you, but you get the follow, you know, the one return shot. Sometimes that's all it's going to take, especially if you have a 120 millimeter main gun, right? 125, so it's a pretty big round. So that said, this, you know, this year, last year, we've seen a lot of interesting things happen with some modernized tanks. And one thing about the modern tanks, they've never really been put to the test to see which tank is going to work and what's not. We do know the Challenger tank, that the British have, the Challenger 2, in Iraq took a pelting of about 90 anti-tank weapons, shoulder-fired weapons, for a couple of hours on end, with the track blown off of it, and the tank was basically scratch paint blown off the monocles. They repaired the track and repainted it and had it back in service 2 days later. The crew was completely fine inside, listening to the thing smacking along the hull of the tank. But they didn't get hit by a real true anti-tank weapon, meaning we don't know if the Challenger would survive an RPG-29, RPG-31, RPG-30, whatever, or a TOW missile. We don't know for sure if